Good afternoon, everyone. My clock shows it's 5:30 now, so I assume that we can commence with this session. I just want to make sure that I'm fully audible. So maybe if one or two you can just drop a comment in the Q&A section to indicate that you can hear me clearly, and then we can start with the session today, please. Okay, so still just waiting for indication that you can hear me. If you just go to the Q&A section, just pop a comment in there so that I can be sure that I'm audible and that you can hear me clearly. And then we can start with today's session, please. I'm just not seeing any comments yet, so I'm hoping that I'm audible and you can hear me. If I'm not going to get any comments, I'm going to assume that everything is fine and up and running and we can start the session. So I'm just going to give it a minute or so just to see if there's any comments coming through confirming that you can hear me very clear, loud and clear. Okay, I've got one there that's saying I'm audible, so all looks to be up and running. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen as well now. And if that is the case, then we can get going. Okay, so all looks fine. I'm audible. I'm assuming that you can see my screen and then we can get this session going. If everybody is happy for me to continue with today's session. Just once again from my side, apologies for the session being cancelled yesterday. I experienced multiple technical issues and in the process tried to reschedule the meeting, but yeah, just didn't come right at the point in time. So we had to reschedule it for today, but now it seems like everything is properly up and running and I can go ahead with my session for today. Okay, so once again, warm welcome to the session for FSC 2601. This will be our fifth online session that we have scheduled. Basically, with these online sessions, we are trying to cover the different lesson tools individually, just to give you a bit of a background, how to approach the lesson tool, as well as obviously going through a bit of theory relating to each of the topics, and then in total going through a few questions and examples to set you on your way with regards to this specific lesson tool. So just by way of introduction, my name is Frank Montgomery, one of the lecturers for this module. That is my office at the Muckleneuk main campus. I also have provided you there with my personal email address. Sorry for that. I've also provided you with my email address there, which is montgf@unisa.ac.za, and that is my personal contact number at the office, the 012-429-4537 number. Normally, with regards to email, the best option there is normally to contact us through our module email, which we'll provide at a later stage, due to the fact that that mailbox is normally manned on a permanent basis, so we'll just get a quicker response if you send it through to our mailbox. So as far as this session, you will see it is being recorded. I will do the whole session, in other words, go through the whole lesson tool, and then at the end, through the Q&A section, you will be able to ask specific questions relating to today's session. So if you've got any questions, just jot them down and at the end pop them in the session there on the Q&A section, and I will then address each of those in an individual basis. Once we are done with the session, the recording will be made available on MyUnisa on our Moodle website for our module. So you can go through it again if you so wish, and also obviously to the benefit of those that could not join us this afternoon. The whole session and the whole recording will be made available there on our module site. Just as far as the lecture is concerned, I've already introduced myself. The other two lectors, I'm sure you are well aware of and I've already met, Mr. Baloyi and Mr. Aisley. We'll also be doing a few of these presentations as we run through the semester. As indicated, that is our dedicated mailbox, fac2601@unisa.ac.za. Indicated it is permanently manned by one of us, so you will definitely get a response, hoping to get back to you within 24 hours after you've popped a question or anything that's on your mind in that mailbox. You've also got the message function with regards to Moodle. So on the Moodle website, there's a message function where you can directly message one of us if you've got any questions or queries. And you would have also noticed there's a discussion forum available on our module site. So if there's any specific topic that you require assistance on, you can just post it there in the discussion forum, and one of us will again respond to that specific question or query that you might have, whether it relates to today's lesson tool or anything with regards to issues that you might have the module itself. You can just drop it there in the discussion forum for us to assist you. So then getting to the specific lecture of today, as we've indicated up front, it's on investment property, which is covered in lesson tool number 6. Investment property is governed by IAS 40. That is the accounting standard with regards to investment property that we need to comply with when we draft the financial statement specifically relating to investment property. So as far as the lecture is concerned, I will first go through some theory, explaining certain concepts relating to investment property, and then we'll end off with a few practical examples to see how we apply this theory in the company financial statements, how it needs to be disclosed or then discussed with relating to investment property specifically. So that is the lecture for today then on lesson tool number 6, investment property, IAS 40. Righto, so with investment property, first the definition, what defines investment property? So that is specifically property that is held to earn rental income for the institution or for capital appreciation. In other words, we obtain a property with the intention and hope that it will increase in value. And through that increase in value, that is your capital appreciation with regards to that property. Or this property can be held for both purposes. So we've got a specific property that we are renting out. So in that process, we are earning a rental income, but in the same time, the value increases. So there's capital appreciation on the property as well. So if both applies, then it will be regarded as a investment property for the company. So that is, first of all, important to know the definition, specifically what is included or what should be included and seen, and then obviously disclosed as investment property. Any property that we hold for rental income specifically, or for capital appreciation, or if both apply, then yes, it needs to be shown and disclosed as investment property specifically. So, investment property is therefore not property held for use in the production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes. So in other words, if you've got a specific item of property, like a plant or a machine that is used in the production of products or the supply of services to your clients, you will then obviously obtain and gather and gain income through using that property specifically to produce or supply a product or a service. If that is the case, we can't classify and recognize it as investment property. or if that property is held for administrative purposes. In other words, the offices of the company itself. If you specifically utilize those as the offices from where to manage your property, again, it won't be seen as investment property because in both these instances, these will be seen as owner-occupied property. So it's a property that we occupy, whereas investment property, as you would have seen, we don't specifically occupy. We rent it out to somebody else, or we just keep the property to gain an increase in the capital value itself. It's never owner-occupied, and therefore it will be investment property. However, specifically I've indicated if you use that property to produce products or supply services, or it is used for administrative purposes, it is seen as owner-occupied property that won't be classified then as investment property. So, an investment property will generate cash flows independently of the other assets held by an entity. So, with an entity or a company, the main purpose is to generate income for the company through the delivery of a specific service. So, we are producing, for example, items that we sell to the public. That is our main purpose. And that is how we generate cash flow. However, in investment properties, cash flows is independent from the normal business activity. So the normal business activity would not be renting out of property. That is something that we do independently from our normal business activities. And that is what specifically distinguishes investment property from our owner-occupied property. So the owner-occupied property is used to generate the main business income for the entity, whereas investment property is independent from this main business activity. So it is a separate cash flow that we produce for the company, which is not its main source of income. And that is the distinction that you need to make between your owner-occupied property and investment property, because obviously there are different ways to account for owner-occupied property, which you would have seen when you've done the lesson 2 on property, plant and equipment. So there's a different standard being IAS 16 that covers your owner-occupied property, whereas IAS 40 specifically only looks at investment property, which is independent from your owner-occupied property. And that is important to know the difference between the two, because that plays a role in how it will be disclosed and accounted for in the financial statements of a company. So, with the distinction then between investment property and owner-occupied property, here are a few examples of what will be seen then as investment properties. So obviously the first one there, land held for long-term capital appreciation, rather than for short-term sale in the ordinary course of the business. So you can obtain land with the intention to sell it in a short period of time after it has increased in value. In other words, your intention initially is to buy this land, to resell it again and make a profit on it. In that instance, it won't be seen as investment property, because the main intention with investment property is to hold it for a long term to ensure there's capital appreciation. If you've got any land that is currently held for an undetermined future use, so we have secured a property, land, but we are at this stage not sure what we are going to do with this land. Will it be used as an owner-occupied property in future, or will it be seen as investment property? So if we have not yet determined that we will use this as owner-occupied property, so that it will occupy for its own purposes, or that we're going to sell it in the short term, it will be seen to be held for capital appreciation, and in that instance, obviously, classified as investment property. So important is initially when you obtain the property is to determine what is the intention, because that will clearly classified between either owner-occupied or investment property. If, however, there's an undetermined future use, then it will be seen to be held for capital appreciation, which falls within the definition of being investment property. If you've got a building owned by the entity or a right of use asset, now the right of use asset you will cover in your leases, where you lease a property, but you've got the right of use to use that specific property for your own purposes. And it is leased out under one or more operating lease. So basically, you own the entity or the building, the property, but it is leased out. In other words, you don't occupy it yourself. It is leased out to a third party, meaning what will happen? You will generate rental income. If it generates rental income and is not owner occupied, it is classified as investment property. If you've got a building that is currently vacant, but the intention is to have it leased out in future. So there is then a specific intention with this building. So it's not an undetermined intention at this stage. You know, it currently is vacant, so it's not owner occupied, but the intention is there to be leased out. If that is the case, again, it classifies as investment property because the intention is there to lease it out. You will receive rental income, and therefore it falls within the definition of investment property. If you've got property that is currently under construction or development for future use as investment property. So currently this building is not yet ready, but when it is ready, it won't be owner occupied. It is specifically constructed and developed as an investment property, either for capital appreciation or to rent it out. So again, it's important to determine what is the intention of the property once it is completed, because that will determine whether it will be classified and regarded as investment property or owner-occupied property. So it's always important that intention at the outset when you obtain the property, or if you self-construct and develop a property, what is the intention once it is completed, in order to distinguish between investment property or then obviously your owner-occupied property. A few examples of items that are specifically fall out the scope of investment property, in other words, won't be seen as investment property. Any property intended for sale in the ordinary course of business or in the process of construction or development for such sale. For example, if you've got inventories, which is covered in IS2, your lesson tool number 4. So basically, that is property inventory that we own, but it is within our normal business activity to manufacture the inventory and then sell it, or to buy inventory for resale. So the intention there is clearly in the ordinary course of business that is going to be conducted, that this will be sold. So there's no investment property definition compliance with regard to these items. Any property to be acquired exclusively with a view to subsequent disposal in the near future or for development and resale. So again, the intention is in obtaining a property to sell it in the near future to generate a profit thereon. There's no intention to keep it on a long term for capital appreciation, and therefore it will also fall outside the scope of investment property. So normally the owner-occupied property will fall within the scope of inventories, IS2, or property, plant and equipment, IAS 16. And you will follow those accounting standards to account for those specific items, whereas if it classifies as investment property, it will be governed by IAS 40. As I've said, specifically, your owner-occupied property covered by IAS 16, those are property held for future use as owner-occupied property. So that is your plant, your machinery, your admin offices where your offices where your admin are running the administration of the company itself. All those fall under owner-occupied property governed by IAS 16. If it is a property that is still under construction and will subsequent to the completion be used as owner-occupied property. So again, the intention there is to construct and complete this to be used as owner-occupied property. It will be governed by IAS 16. Any property occupied by employees, whether or not the employees pay rent at market rates. So that property that's occupied by employees, again, won't be seen as investment property. It will be seen as owner-occupied property governed by IAS 16. Any owner-occupied property awaiting disposal. So it happens from time to time with a machine, for example, that it has a limited lifespan. So if you are still holding onto that machine, just waiting to dispose it and have it replaced by a newer machine, it still falls and is governed by IAS 16 because the intention of that property is still to be, or was initially to be used in the normal business activities of the company to generate income. So it is not generating income independently. It is for the main business activity. All that is happening now, it is currently not producing any income for you, but we are just waiting to dispose of it. Once it is replaced by a new machine, for example, it will again be falling under IAS 16 because it forms part of the main business activity. And then property that is leased to another entity under a finance lease, as it will also be seen as not falling under investment property. So it won't be governed by IAS 40. Now, in some instances, you will find that the properties that we obtain or you find in a company will comprise a portion held as investment property and another portion held as owner-occupied property. So within the same building, for example, there might be a section that is used for the manufacturing of your products. And there might be another section of the building that you currently can't use properly for the purposes of the company. So rather than leaving it vacant, you rent it out. In other words, it classifies as an investment property. So within the same building, you've got two portions that will classify as owner-occupied as well as investment property. Now, if these portions could be sold separately or leased out separately on a finance lease, you will have to account for these portions separately. In other words, you will have to show it separately as a owner-occupied property under property, plant, and equipment, and another one as investment properties. You have to split up these two portions. If, however, the portions could not be sold separately, in other words, if you can't sell the plant and the section that is rented out separately, the property is investment property only if an insignificant portion is held for use in production or supply of goods or services or admin purposes. Now, to determine what is insignificant or not, we will probably have to look at the percentage occupation between the two portions. So say, for example, that the portion that is occupied for the plant is 20%. But the section that is occupied for the investment property part is 80%. So in that instance, we can argue that the insignificant portion, say 20%, is held for the use of production or supply of goods or services. Therefore, if you can't sell those separately, we will have to disclose the entire property as investment property. So very important then, if you've got different portions, you need to determine, can it be sold separately? And then we disclose it separately. If not possible, determine what portion of this property is for owner-occupied, what portion is for investment property. If an insignificant portion is held for production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes, in other words, the owner-occupied is seen as insignificant, the entire property will be seen as investment property. Okay, so that is just as far as a few examples and the definitions go to distinguish between owner-occupied property and investment property. So once we have determined that we do have investment property, how do we recognize it, or when can we recognize it? Firstly, it should be probable that future economic benefits will flow to the entity. So in other words, for example, if you've got a rental agreement in place, if there's a rental agreement in place, it means there's a contract that you will receive the rent in future. So there will be future economic benefits that will flow to you. You'll be able to recognize it as investment property. Then how do we measure it? At what value? The cost of the investment property needs to be measured reliably. And normally the measurement there would be the cost. How much did we pay to obtain the investment property? And that will be a fixed price. I mean, there needs to be a purchase price that we pay to obtain the investment property, and that will be the value that could be measured reliably. An entity will evaluate under this recognition principle all its investment property costs at the time they are incurred. So when you incur the cost, you need to recognize that total cost as investment property. Those costs will include the cost initially to acquire the investment property. That will be the cost price, as we've already indicated. Subsequent to obtaining the investment property, it might require from us to add on to the investment property, or to replace a part of it, or to service a property, to maintain it in its proper condition. So all those subsequent costs that we incur will be added to the initial cost price at which it was acquired for. So any increase basically in the capital value that increases the capital value of the investment property needs to be added when it is incurred. So here it might be that we acquired the investment property 5 years ago. So that would be the initial cost price. In a 3-year or after 3 years, we add on to this investment property. And that will then be the subsequent expenditure. When it is incurred in that specific year, you will add it to the value of the investment property itself. So as we've said, it needs to be measured reliably, as we've already indicated initially at the cost price, how much did we pay for it, including any relevant transaction cost, such as any professional fees for legal services to have the contract for the purchase got in place, serve it in place, any property transfer taxes, your transfer duties that we incurred, and any other related transaction cost to obtain the investment property. So not only the cost price, but any transaction cost related to this transaction to secure the investment property to allow us to purchase this investment property needs to be included in that total cost price, and that will become the initial recognized value of the investment property. Okay, so your purchase price as well as any related transaction costs that we incurred. As we've said, your subsequent measurement with regards to investment property. So as we've said initially at cost, including transaction cost. So then at the end of each year, we need to determine at what value will we keep on recognizing the investment property. And we've got two options here, either at the fair value or we stick to the cost model. And that will become our accounting policy, and it shall apply to all of its investment property. So if you've got, for example, 3 investment properties that you acquired, and you decide from now on, I'm going to use the fair value model, all 3 of those investment properties needs to be disclosed at the fair value in future. Same applies if you're going to stay with the cost model, all 3 of those investment properties needs to be retained and recognized at the cost that it was incurred when we obtained these investment properties. So that is a choice that is allowed by IAS 40. But once you've decided on which of these to follow, you need to apply it to all of its investment properties. So you can't have some of them at fair value and some of them at cost. It's either at fair or at cost that you need to recognize the investment properties. So the fair value of the investment property must be determined, though, irrespective of whether a fair value model or cost model is used. Obviously, if you use the fair value model, you will have to determine the fair value because that is the value at which you will disclose it. If you however decide to continue with the cost model, it will mean that you will recognize it at cost, but you still need to determine what is the actual current fair value, because that needs to be disclosed for each investment property as well. So if you use a fair value model, you need to determine the fair value to determine at what value will you disclose it. If you use the cost model, yes, you will show the value at cost, but you still need to determine what is the current fair value of that specific investment property, because the fair value also just needs to be disclosed separately. So you will still show on the financial statements the cost, but then separately you need to also disclose the specific fair value of that item shown at cost. An entity is encouraged, but it's not a requirement of IAS 40, to determine this fair value on the basis of a valuation by an independent valuer who holds a recognized and relevant professional qualification and has recent experience in the location and category of the investment property being valued. So basically, it requires you to get an expert that is qualified to do the valuation based on the specific type of property that you have. So it might be a specific machine, and this valuer has got experience in similar type of machines. So he will specifically know at what value these machines trade at a specific point in time, and therefore will be able to apply a fair value to that machine at a specific point in time. Because at the end of each financial year, you need to establish the fair value of all the investment properties. And that is where this independent valuer will come in, and he will determine what he deems a fair value to be, which we can then accept as being correct based on his experience with the location and category of the investment property being valued. So basically, the company needs to go out and seek these professionals to ensure that a correct fair value is attached to its investment properties, to ensure that that correct value is then disclosed. As we've said, it is not a requirement, but it is advisable to ensure that a relevant value is disclosed regarding the fair value of the property. What specifically is considered to be fair value? So this is the price that you would be receiving if you sell an asset or pay to transfer liability in an ordinary transaction between market participants at the measurement date. So if at today you go out and you want to buy that machine will have a specific price attached to it, which is considered to be the fair value. That is what the seller deems to be the fair value of this item that you need to pay then to acquire it. And that is basically the fair value as agreed upon by a buyer and a seller in an ordinary transaction, determined obviously by market movements, which determines the value of the specific property that you are looking at. And that is basically what is to be seen as a fair value to be paid to obtain an asset. After our initial recognition, as we've said, an entity can choose either the fair value or the cost model. If you choose the fair value, you, as we've said, need to measure all investment property at fair value, with the exception when there's clear evidence when you first acquire that investment property that the fair value of the investment property is not reliably measurable on a continuing basis. So normally when you buy a machine or a vehicle for that specific purpose, it should be possible to determine a fair value on a yearly basis based on the value that it trades within the market. However, if it is a unique type of property that you obtain, and at first impression, you deem that that fair value is not going to be possible to measure it reliably on a continuing basis. And this will arise when the market for comparable properties is inactive. So, for example, there are few recent transactions, price quotations are not current, or observed transaction prices indicate that the seller was forced to sell. In other words, selling at a price far less than the normal fair value. And there are no alternative reliable measurements of fair value. For example, you can't have a discounted cash flow projection. It's not possible to determine what are the future cash flows associated with this specific property. Now, if all of this apply, or any of this applies, an entity shall measure that investment property using the cost model, and only then if it is not possible to actually determine and attach a fair value to that investment property. So this will be really in unique circumstances and not be the norm. In most circumstances, you should be able to determine a fair value, but in such cases where that is not possible, where it's an inactive market related to that specific property, and you can't determine a proper fair value that is reliable, you are allowed to use the cost model for that specific property, and then obviously it needs to be disclosed in accordance with the cost model. Now, if you initially measure investment property, as we've said, it is at cost. If you then move over to the fair value, there might be, or there will be, a difference between initial cost and the new fair value. The new fair value could be more or less than the original cost. If it is more, it means there's been a gain in the value of the asset or the property. If the fair value is less, it means there is a loss in the value of the property. And any such gain or loss needs to be recognized in the profit or loss for the period in which it arises. So normally what you need to do at the end of each financial year, if you choose the fair value model, you will determine the fair value, compare it with the cost. If there's a gain, immediately recognize it in profit or loss. If there's a loss, immediately recognize it in that year as a loss in your profit or loss statement. So it's just a comparison between the cost and the fair value attached to the investment property. If you use the cost model, after initial recognition, an entity that chooses the cost model shall measure its investment properties, all of them, at cost. You will apply a depreciation as you normally do, as we did in property, plant, and equipment. And if there's any impairment losses, in other words, if this specific machine that you are using, for example, is withdrawn from the market, there will be a devaluation in the value of these machines at the value at which a fair value would be considered for them. And that will be seen as an impairment loss, which you will recognize in accordance with your loss for that specific item in your profit or loss account. But carried at cost means initially showed at cost, you will then depreciate the investment property over its useful life, and it will be done in accordance with the normal principles applied in IAS 16, property, plant, and equipment. So in this instance, there's no difference between the fair value and the cost model because we are applying only the cost model. Showed at cost, make provision for depreciation, and also consider the impact of any impairment losses that might be relevant to the investment property. Derecognition, as we've said, with investment property, the intention is there to keep it for a long period of time. If you decide at a specific point in time that you're going to not use this anymore, or if you feel that the capital appreciation has slowed down and you want to sell it, it is seen as a derecognition. So you eliminate it from your statement of financial position on the date of disposal, because no future economic benefits are expected from its disposal. So in essence, you need to determine at a certain point in time, if you've got this investment property, if there's no further or future capital appreciation expected, you will then probably dispose it, and then it is removed from the financial statements due to the fact that no future economic benefits are expected with regards to the further use of the investment property. Any gains or losses from the retirement or disposal of investment property will then obviously be seen as the difference between the disposal proceeds, in other words, how much did you sell it for, and the carrying amount of the asset at the date of the transaction. And that will then be either a gain, in other words, if your disposal proceeds is more than the carrying amount, there will be a gain. If the disposal is less than the carrying amount, there will be a loss. And again, we will simply recognize that in your profit or loss in the period of the retirement or disposal of the property investment. So exactly the same principle that we applied in property, plant, and equipment. If you sell it, how much did we sell it for? How much was it worth at the date of the transaction? In other words, a carrying amount. If you sold it for more, there's a gain. If you sold it for this, there is a loss. Now, the amount of consideration to be included in the gain or loss arising from the derecognition of the investment property is determined in accordance with requirements for determining a transaction price in IFRS 15 revenue from contract with customers, which will still cover. But basically what it means, this transaction price will be seen as your sales price. Because obviously if you sell it, again, there comes a principle of fair value. There is a willing buyer and a willing seller. They determine what is the fair value of this transaction. This will be seen as a transaction price, which is your disposal proceeds amount, and that is the amount at which the sale will then be recorded in the financial statements. As far as disclosure is concerned in the financial statements, if you use either the fair value and cost model, you need to disclose, obviously, what is your accounting policy? Do you apply the fair value model or the cost model for the valuation of investment property? When classification is difficult, you need to determine the criteria it uses to distinguish investment property from owner-occupied property and from property held for sale in the ordinary course of business. Okay, so that would be the example, as we've said, if the same property is owner-occupied as well as form part of investment property, how do you classify? It's difficult to classify, but then it might work on a percentage occupation. And that criteria needs to be disclosed. How did you decide whether it is more owner-occupied or more investment property, determining at what it will be classified, either as owner-occupied or as investment property? Then the extent to which the fair value of the investment property is based on a valuation by an independent qualified valuer who holds a recognized and relevant professional qualification and has recent experience. So that is, again, obviously, if you use the fair value model, the fair value needs to be determined, and you need to indicate how was it determined, who determined it, and what is the qualifications of this person. Also, as we've said, even if you use a cost model, you still need to disclose the fair value. And again, provide the details of how this fair value was determined, by whom it was determined, and what is the qualifications of the specific person. And then we've said, in the unique circumstances, if it's not possible to determine the fair value, this also needs to be disclosed with just a short description of why it was not possible to determine a fair value for a specific investment property. You also need to disclose the amounts recognized in profit or loss for the rental income of investment property. So if it's rented out, how much rental income that you received in an accounting period. Your direct operating expenses, including repairs and maintenance, arising from the investment property that generated rental income during the period. So it obviously, if you're renting out property, it will require you to do repairs and maintenance on the property for the tenants. And all those expenses needs to be disclosed in your profit or loss separately. Your direct operating expenses, including repairs and maintenance arising from investment property that did not generate rental income during the period. So if you have a investment property with the intention to rent it out, but it was vacant during a period of the year or vacant for the entire year, it might still require repairs and maintenance to be done. And again, those expenses need to be disclosed in your profit or loss statement, as well as any contractual obligations to purchase, construct or develop investment property, or for the repairs, maintenance and enhancements of that investment property. Also needs to be disclosed the total expense in your profit or loss for the current financial year. In addition to these disclosures, an entity that applies the fair value model also needs to disclose the reconciliation between the carrying amounts at the beginning and the closing at the end of the financial year. So if your financial year runs from January to December, you need to show the carrying amount on 1 January, and you need to show the carrying amount on 31 December, obviously. The difference between the two carrying amounts will represent any additions that might have taken place. And you need to disclose separately those additions resulting from acquisitions and those resulting from subsequent expenditure, recognizing the carrying amount of the asset. So in this example or requirement, we already might have investment property at the beginning of a year. During the year, there's expenditure on this investment property that is capital of nature. It will be capitalized and needs to be showed separately. It might also be that we acquired another investment property. That acquisition needs to be shown separately. So in total, we're just showing and grouping together our total investment properties, distinguishing between new acquisitions and subsequent expenditure on existing investment property. We also need to disclose net gains or losses from fair value adjustments. So as we've said, at the end of the year, determine the fair value. If there's an increase, show what the gain was. If there was a decrease, we need to show what the loss was on the fair value adjustment that has taken place in the current financial year. And that is as far as the theory is concerned in how to identify initially what is investment property, how to recognize and measure investment property. We've run through the difference between investment property and owner-occupied property, obviously. And now we've also had a look at what then needs to be disclosed once you've decided that something is investment property, and then you have chosen between either the fair value or the cost model. So let's run through a few examples to look at a practical approach. So we've got a company here, and it owns several properties. Your first property is in a small rural town. They've bought an old house and converted it to offices. The business is still growing, and the house is currently not fully occupied by the company. Attached to the house is a small flatlet, and that is being rented out. This part of the house will eventually also be occupied by the business. Okay, so it's still busy growing. The intention here is that it will be occupied by the company. Currently in the small flatlet, it is rented out. but it will eventually also be occupied by the business for its purposes. So that is property 1. Property 2, piece of land in Johannesburg. There is the possibility that this land will be expropriated by the local council for the construction of a new road. The original intention of the company when they bought this land was to develop its head offices here. Now we have decided to wait for the final decision of the council before erecting the new offices on this land. So the intention was to have the head offices there. We have not started with the offices as yet because we're waiting on the outcome of whether it will be expropriated. Then property 3, Temba and another company are occupying a building that Temba owns. The other company pays a market-related rental to Temba, and the building is occupied in a ratio of 30% to 70% by Temba and the other company respectively. So 30% by Temba and 70% by the other company. The intention is that Temba and the other company will move to their respective new head offices once they have been erected, and that the existing building will then be held until it can be sold for a good price. So this is just a temporary arrangement at the moment between the two companies, but they will then move on to the new head offices and then sell off this property. So required from us is to classify these 3 properties as either investment properties or owner-occupied properties in the accounting records with reasons for our classification. So if we look at property number 1, property number 1 will be classified as an owner-occupied property used in the supply of services. The supply of these services generates cash flow that is attributable not merely to this property, but also to other assets used in the business of Temba Limited. The services supplied from this home office are the most significant component of the whole arrangement. The letting out of the flat to tenants is an ancillary service and does not change the classification of this building as an owner-occupied property. So, main situation here is it is cash flows that is generated for the normal business activities of the company. Therefore, it will be seen as an owner-occupied property and not as investment property, because it is used in the business to generate cash flows. It is not an additional income that it generates from the property itself. And therefore, we will have to classify this as an owner-occupied property. Property number 2 will also be classified as an owner-occupied property. A property held for future development and subsequent use as owner-occupied property is not investment property, but must be classified as owner-occupied property. The fact that there is currently uncertainty as to the ultimate use of this land because of the outstanding decision of the local council does not change the intention of Temba to build its head offices on this piece of land. So that is why we've said initially, when you obtain a property, look at the initial intention. The initial intention was to build its head offices there. Hence, at acquisition, that is the intention to have its offices there, meaning it will be owner-occupied. This might change, it might not, it will not change in the future, but it is under the scrutiny now of the decision that the local council might then expropriate this property. But up until this stage, we still need to see this as the intention to be held as owner-occupied property. Therefore, it needs to be classified as owner-occupied property based on the initial intention of the company. Okay, as far as property 3 is concerned, now here is one of those difficult ones to classify. We will need judgment when determining whether this property qualifies as investment property in the records of Temba Limited. So here is where Temba Limited must develop a criteria to exercise judgments in accordance with the definition of investment property. This criteria needs to be classified, needs to be disclosed when the classification is difficult. The fact that Temba occupies less than 50% of the building itself and therefore use less than 50% in the production of goods or the supply of services or for administrative purposes mean that the majority of the building is occupied by the tenants. Remember, we said Temba occupies 30%, so only 30% is used in the production of goods or supply of services or for admin purposes, while the other 70%, the majority, is occupied by tenants and basically secures a rental income. Therefore, we can make the judgment call to say that this building can therefore be classified as investment property, depending on what is the criteria used by Temba. So we will need to determine if we go from the criteria that we occupy less than 50%, this is a criteria that we use. We need to disclose this. A possible change in the future does not influence the classification of a property at this stage. Once again, it's the intention at initial recognition of the property. So we need to make and set out clear criteria. What percentage will be considered to distinguish between owner-occupied or investment property? Seeing that we feel that less than 50% is used for owner-occupied properties, we will then classify this as investment property and disclose this as such in the financial statements quite clearly of the criteria used to identify this property, seeing that it consists of two components, as we identified when we went through the theory, when it's difficult to make this distinction. Okay, so I hope with regards to example 1, it's clear the type of situations that you can get and how we should then just apply the simple theory and definitions given to us by IAS 40 in investment property on how we go about and distinguishing whether a property is owner-occupied or whether a property could be seen as investment property and how it should then be disclosed in the financial statements. Let's look at our second example. Khulisi, a manufacturing company of a year ended 31 December. The following details are available to regarding its fixed property. They acquired land with an office building on 1 January, which is the beginning of our financial year, for 5,020,000, consisting of land and building separately. Khulisi also paid agents' commission and legal fees of 50,000 and 20,000 respectively to acquire these two properties. For the period from 1 January, Khulisi made improvements to the building amounting to 560,000. This subsequent expenditure meets the subsequent recognition criteria. In other words, it is seen as increasing the capital value of the property, so therefore it needs to be capitalized. It is not seen to repair and maintain. If it is only repairs and maintenance, those expenses go directly to your profit and loss account. It is not capitalized. The land and buildings were available for use as intended by management, as well as brought into use and rented out to a tenant on 31 March 2024. A rental agreement with a tenant was signed on 31 March for a monthly rent of 75,000, and occupation by the tenant was from 1 April 2024. An independent sworn appraiser provided the management of Khulisi with the following fair values of the property. As we've said, at the end of each financial year, we need to get a sworn appraiser, a specialist, a professional, to determine what the fair values is to be considered. And he determined the fair value of land to be 1.6 million and that of building 4,150,000. As per the accounting policy, Khulisi has decided to account for investment property using the fair values. So not the cost model, but the fair value. Okay, ignore the implications of VAT, and all amounts are considered to be material. Required from us, the relevant journal entries and accounting records of Khulisi to correctly account for the revaluation of the property, the fair value adjustment, and prepare the investment property note at the end of the financial year. How do we go about that? I'll get to the journal now. So this is how investment property will be disclosed. We show the investment property separately. We've got land and we've got building. As we've said, there needs to be a reconciliation between the opening and the closing amounts. In this instance, the carrying amount at the beginning of the year would be 0 for both. Why? Because we only acquired these two properties on 1 January, meaning when the year started, there was no investment property to be disclosed. Then we need to show in this reconciliation distinguishing between acquisitions and subsequent expenditures. As far as the acquisition is concerned, acquisition was the two that we acquired. The land for 1,325,000 and the building for 3,695,000. So your total acquisition will be reflected as the purchase price in total for land and buildings, the 5,020,000. That is your transaction price. Then we also had transaction cost relating to the purchase of the investment property, being agent's commission of 50,000 and legal fees of 20,000. So in total, 5,090,000 is the total cost price. We appropriate that then between land and buildings, between the individual purchase prices that we paid for land and buildings separately. Remember that 5,020,000 consists of the cost price of land and the cost price of buildings. So we basically appropriate the agent's commission and the legal fees of 15,000 and 20,000 to the two properties in the relation of how much they each cost with reference to the total cost price. So it's just basically a percentage that the land costs based to the total price and the buildings to the total price, appropriated to the total cost to give us then the individual value for land and the individual value for buildings. So that is how we show the acquisition price. So it's basically the cost price of the land and the cost price of the building. This 1,325,000 plus the 3,695, and then we appropriated based on the percentage cost of each these transaction costs to them to show the total cost price for both items. Your additions from subsequent expenditure is just the 560,000 that was given to us in the information, saying for the period from 1 January, the improvements to the building amounted to 560, and this meets the recognition criteria. So the 560 was specifically for the buildings, so we will add it to the buildings. Then at the end of the year, the fair value adjustment needs to be brought in consideration by looking at the fair values that was given to us by the sworn appraiser, saying that he deems land to be worth 1.6 million, he deems building to be worth 4,150,000. That we need to compare to the current carrying amount of the two properties to determine either a fair value gain or a fair value loss. How do we do that? Land, the fair value by the sworn appraiser is 1.6 million. The current carrying amount is this cost of 1,343,476 that we've just determined here, which means there's a net increase of 256,524 in the value of land. Exactly the same on the building. The sworn appraiser deems the fair value to be worth 4,150,000. The carrying amount consists of the cost plus the subsequent expenditure. So if you subtract both these amounts, it means the current carrying amount is actually more than what the fair value is deemed to be. So there will be a loss with regards to building, meaning your total fair value adjustment is the fair value of the investment property, the 1.6 plus a 4,150,000, that is your total fair value, less the cost price of your investment property, the cost of the land, the cost of the building, including the transaction cost, and then obviously the subsequent expenditure, meaning a net increase of 100,000. And that 100,000 you will see is also the difference between, if you take the 2,565 to 4, and you subtract 1,565 it's a net difference of 100,000, a net gain of 100,000 in the fair value. And that is where we will then disclose these fair value adjustments for land 256, for building a negative loss of 156, a net gain of 100,000, and this will be the fair value in total at the end of the year of our two investment properties. So as far as the note is concerned, a reconciliation between the opening and the closing amount, separately showing acquisitions, separately showing expenditure, capital expenditure, and separately showing adjustments. And the final part then would just to be showing this net fair value adjustment as a journal entry, meaning investment property increased by 100,000, so we debit the asset, and going through to your fair value adjustment, your profit or loss is a net gain of 100,000 Rand. So this increased the value of investment property in the statement of financial position. The fair value adjustment go to your profit and loss account, and we will recognize an income, a gain of 100,000 Rand with regards to the fair value adjustment on investment property. So I hope that is quite clear then, the journal entry, the note, and how we got to the subsequent values for all the items. Okay, then moving on to our final example for the evening, example 3. So here we've got ABC Properties acquired a vacant piece of land during current financial year for 550,000, and it's currently held for an undetermined future use. There was transaction cost amounting to 20,000 directly relating to the acquisition of the vacant land. On the date of acquisition of this vacant land, there's a clear evidence that the fair value of this property cannot be reliably determined on a continuing basis, since comparable market transactions are infrequent and alternative reliable estimates of fair value are not available. The financial director is unsure on how this vacant land should be classified and measured, and ask you, the financial accountant, to investigate this and report back to him. The policy with ABC Properties state that investment property is accounted for in accordance with the fair value model, while owner-occupied property is accounted for in accordance with the cost model. So required from us, prepare a memorandum in response to this inquiry by the financial director about the classification and measurement, initial as well as subsequent, of this vacant land, with reference to IAS 40 investment property and IAS 16 property, plant and equipment where appropriate. And then obviously your answer should comply with requirements of international financial reporting standards. So how does one approach a question like this? So we are asked to prepare a memorandum. So the format, first of all, should be correct to indicate this memorandum is addressed to the financial director. It comes from yourself being the financial accountant. What is the subject? It is the classification and initial and subsequent measurement of vacant land, because that is what the whole question and query is about. Provide the date on which the report was drafted or the memorandum was drafted. Then in this memorandum, set out in a logical way the discussion regarding, first of all, looking at the classification and then the initial and subsequent measurement of the vacant land with obvious reference to IAS 16 as well as IAS 40, if it is applicable in this specific situation. So we will just start off here by saying, please find below the outcome of the inquiry into the matter about the classification and initial and subsequent measurement of the vacant land. First of all, classification of the vacant land. IAS 40 defines investment property as property, either land or building, held to earn rental income or for capital appreciation or both, rather than for use in the production or supply of goods and services or for administrative purposes. So first of all, just provide a definition of what is seen as being investment property, because that is the basis on which you will start your argument in the classification of this vacant land. So therefore, it's just important to provide the definition of what is seen as investment property. In terms of IAS 40, land held for a currently undetermined future use is regarded as land held for capital appreciation. Remember, we said if you obtain a property, normally the intention of the property needs to be determined right on the outset. In this instance, there was an undetermined future use. We're not currently sure, will it be used as being owner-occupied? Will it be used as investment property? If that is unsure, IAS 40 immediately tells us then it will be held for capital appreciation, meaning you will be able to classify investment property or the vacant land as investment property and not as owner-occupied property based on the undetermined future use as specified in terms of IAS 40. So here we've classified the vacant land by reference to the definition of what is investment property, and then secondly, on the principle of IAS 40 saying that if there's an undetermined future use, it will classify as investment property because then it is seen as being held for capital appreciation. So straightforward there, get to the point and just discuss regarding the classification of the vacant land. As far as initial measurement is concerned at transaction date, as per IAS 40, owned investment property shall be measured initially at cost, including transaction cost. So what is the cost? It is a price that you paid for it, the transaction price, as well as associated transaction cost. So in our example, the vacant land will be measured initially at the amount paid for it of 550,000, including the transaction cost of 20,000, which means initial measurement value will be 535,000 Rand. That is the total cost initially recognized for the investment property. Your subsequent measurement of the vacant land. Now, IAS 40 requires a company to choose either the fair value model or the cost model as its accounting policy for subsequent measurement of all its investment property. And the policy must apply to all investment property. Since our company's accounting policy is that we will be using a fair value model, it means that this vacant land must be measured at fair value at year end. So this is a policy adopted and applied, which means all investment property will be classified and disclosed in accordance with the fair value model at the end of the financial year. There is a presumption that a company will be able to reliably measure the fair value of its investment property on a continuing basis, unless on the date of acquisition of the property, there's a clear evidence that the fair value of the property cannot reliably be determined on a continuing basis. This arises and only when comparable market transactions are infrequent and alternative reliable estimates of fair value are not available. In such cases, the investment property shall be measured using the cost model in accordance with IAS 60. The residual value shall be seen as zero, and IAS 60 shall be applied until the disposal of the property. So if it's not possible, and if we deem that the fair value can't be determined on a continuing basis, then obviously, even if you still apply and adopt the fair value model, this measures or prompts us then to go to IAS 16 and use it and measure it in accordance with the cost model, meaning keep it at cost, right of depreciation, and show the carrying amount up until the disposal of the property. Now, this is indeed the case with this vacant land. The information provided indicates that on the date of acquisition of this vacant land, there is no clear evidence that the fair value of this property cannot be reliably determined on a continuing basis, since comparable market transactions are infrequent and alternative reliable estimates of the fair value are not available. Therefore, after initial recognition, the vacant land will be carried at its cost price of 535,000 and may be reduced by any impairment losses. Okay, so obviously we've got land here so there won't be any depreciation written off on land. So it will be shown and kept in the accounting records at the cost of 535, and you will only reduce it by any possible impairment losses. Again, you need to be complete by first explaining what is the exception in total, and then applying it by saying, right, we have adopted the fair value model, but due to the fact that it's not possible to determine the fair value, it will revert to the cost model and it will be carried at cost. And then just finish it off nicely. Should you have any further inquiries, please contact me, yours faithfully, and you sign off your report. So quite in detail information that you need to include in this memorandum to specifically discuss the requirements from you. Classify, why is it classified as investment property, distinguish between investment and property and owner-occupied property, initial measurement at its cost price, its transaction price, including transaction costs, and then the subsequent measurement in adoption of the fair value model, but then going through the exception if it's not possible to determine the fair value in the future. And that would be the memorandum that you prepare. And that is then the end of our presentation. Thank you so much. I will then now revert to any questions that you might have on investment property. Any questions that you might have, you are more than welcome to post them in the Q&A section, and I will then have a look at those and address those individually. Okay, so please feel free, drop any questions in the Q&A section if there's anything that wasn't clear, any questions that you might have. You can just pop them in the Q&A section and we run through them until the end of our session. We've still got about 10 minutes or so left in the session, so feel free to drop any questions in there for me. I still don't see any questions at the moment. Still give it another 5 minutes or so. There's still some time left. So please, any questions that you might have at this point in time regarding this presentation on investment property, feel free to drop me a question there. Okay, still waiting to see any questions. If there aren't any questions, I'm then assuming and hoping that the presentation was of such a nature that it's quite clear and that you understand everything that was explained. But yeah, feel free. I mean, you can just still ask any question that you want. I will then address that question for you. I'm still not seeing any questions. Let's see, there might be one popping in now. Okay, here we go. First question. Okay, with regards to the last example, so that I would assume was the memo that we discussed, it seems that both properties are treated differently. I saw something about cost and fair value. Is that allowed as only one policy should be adopted? You may have read or remember wrong. Okay, remember with that last property we said the policy adopted there, or the accounting policy was to reflect and show investment property at fair value. However, when we obtained this investment property at the date of acquisition, it became clear that in the future, on a continuing basis, it would not be possible to determine the fair value at each and every end of financial year. Now, even though we have adopted and apply in accordance with the accounting policy, in accordance with the fair value, if you are not possible to reliably measure the fair value on a continuing basis, you can show it at cost because it's not possible to determine a reliably measured fair value. And that is why, even though the policy indicates fair value, the fact that you can't determine the fair value, you will show this investment property at cost, but you just need to disclose the reason for showing at cost, in that there is not a market available to determine reliable fair value with regards to that specific property. And that is why the reason why it looks like there are two different values attached to the same property, but that is basically one of the exceptions to the rule. I hope that is clear and answers your question. There's still a few minutes left, so still time for any questions that you might have. Feel free and welcome to pop those in your Q&A part, and I will gladly answer those questions for you. Okay, we'll give it another, say, 5 minutes, 5 more minutes for any questions that you might have on this session tonight. Feel free, give it a go. Pop your questions in the Q&A part, and I will have a look at those and try to answer any questions that you might have on this presentation tonight. Okay, follow-up question then with the example that we just have. So if a note was required for this, it would not show the last line, the fair value adjustment, correct? It will only show acquired cost and subsequent costs. Yes, indeed, correct. You will then disclose that investment property at its original cost that you acquired it at. If there were any subsequent cost, you will add that, but there won't obviously be any fair value adjustment due to the fact that it's not possible to determine the investment property value or the fair value of the investment property. So you can't have a fair value adjustment at all. So yes, correct. It will just be shown at its cost price. Okay, let's see. 3, 4 more minutes left in our session. More than welcome to ask any additional questions that you still might have, any burning issues on investment property that you are still not comfortable with. And just having a look in our Q&A section, no updated questions at the current moment that I can see. Still give it another 3 minutes or so. Okay, for exam purposes, the reference to IAS is important for marks. Specifically in the example 3 that we did, the question specifically required from us to write a memo with a specific reference to IAS 40 and IAS 16. So in that example, yes, you will have to refer to what IAS 40 determines, what IAS 60 determines in order with regards to the classification of the investment property initially. So yes, it's quite important to have the reference in the memo, because remember, you always need to answer what the question asks from you. So in the question, in the required part, it specifically asked you to refer to both these accounting standards when you draft the memo. So yes, definitely important to refer to both of them there. Okay, I'm going to give 3 more minutes time then. 3 more minutes left, and then we will wrap up this session tonight. 3 more minutes for any questions that you might have. Okay, don't see any new questions. Still 2 minutes to go. Counting it down, 2 minutes to go. Any questions that you might still have, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and we will have a look at those as they come through. Okay, when do we reference to IFRS then? Remember, we've got different standards. Some of the standards, like investment property and property, plant, and equipment specifically, is governed by IAS 16 and 40, the International Accounting Standards. Your newer standards are your IFRS standards, the International Financial Reporting Standards. So those would be, for example, the new IFRS 18 on the presentation of financial statements, your IFRS 15 on revenue. So different standards cover different topics. So it depends on the type of unit or topic that you're dealing with. They will be governed, like I said, your older statements are still your IAS statements. All your newer sort of statements will be your IFRS statements, and they will then reference to that specific lesson unit that you are dealing with. Okay, 1 minute remaining. 1 minute before we wrap up the session. So maybe time for one last final question. More than welcome to pop it in there. Otherwise, I'm going to shut down the session on investment property. And also remember, if you still have a question, you didn't ask it here, or you thought everything was clear and you go back and there's something that is unclear, feel free, pop a message to our mailbox fsc2601@unisa.ac.za, and we'll gladly assist you there, even if it relates to the session tonight. We will still answer any future questions that you might have on the investment property. Even though you did not ask it tonight, no problem at all. At any later stage, you can still ask a question with regards to investment property. Okay, so it seems to me that there's no further questions at this stage. So therefore, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on this Friday evening. Once again, sincere apologies for the issues that we encountered yesterday that did not make it possible for this presentation, but at least now we managed to get it done and dusted. I hope it was beneficial to you, that it will help you in your studies. Thank you for your presence. Have a super and lovely weekend. All the best. God bless. Goodbye.